Welcome back to Waters Ironworks. We are continuing our series, working through the national curriculum from ABANA. We are doing section 1.4, which is all about tapers today. So we are getting into some more actual forge work finally. Today we're going to be looking at the square taper, the octagon taper, the round taper, the diamond taper, and the chisel tip taper. These are 5 essential blacksmithing skills, which is why they are early on in this process. You need to know how to do all of these, really for just about any project that you're going to do, certainly for the Gate 1 latch project that we are working our way up towards. So let's get some steel hot and let's take a look at the square taper first. So let's talk about how we make a point on things. I have a number of videos on this. I will link to a video about how to another way of putting a point on material. For this, though, we're going to go with a slightly different way of doing it. Historically, I've said far edge of the anvil. An alternative way to do it is actually over the horn of the anvil instead. What we want to do is put the end of our piece of steel right on the midline of the horn. We're going to come in with the hammer then at a little bit of an angle here. Our steel is going to come up to half the angle of the point that we're trying to make. And we're going to give it a hammer blow or two, roll it, give it a hammer blow or two. And as we start drawing this out, every time or every couple times we hit it, we're going to pull back a little bit. That's going to start elongating the point here. We want to keep the end where that point is going to be right on the center line of the anvil, just going back and forth as we draw it out. Just a different way to do it. Can be potentially a little bit faster than doing it on the edge of the anvil, but does require a little bit more skill. One more thing before we actually grab that piece out of the fire, we do want to put a mark on here. A big part of the skill in this 1.4 is being able to forge things consistently, either to a specific length or over a specific piece of the bar. So for all of these, before we do the forging, I'm going to come in. We're going to make a mark 1.5 inches back. That's a little bit of an arbitrary number. Not too long, not too short. And then we'll come in with our center punch. Come to the center line on the horn of the anvil, up at a bit of an angle. Take that to a pretty sharp point. So you can see as I hammered, drawing back, always keeping the tip right there at the center line so that my hammer can come down and hit that steel without running into the horn. Now that we've got the point, we're going to find our punch mark, and starting at the point, we're going to work our way back all the way to that punch mark. And what we want to make is a nice even taper the whole way, that doesn't have bellies, that sits flat, that has the point well centered. So I'm going to work from my point back all the way to my punch mark, making sure that I don't go over that distance. If you have trouble seeing it, it can be useful to line the punch mark up with the edge of the anvil. That can be a nice visual representation for where you want to hammer to. And what I'm looking for here as I do this tapering, right, is I want to see nice straight edges. I don't want to see any bellies. So I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but right here when I look, there's a little bit of a hump right there. That means I'm going to need to come in here and hammer to take that out. So to really make these nice, you are going to want to look at them in between every hammer blow, really spin them around a little bit and look for where you've got things that are bulging out and hammer on those to push them back in. Come in, Just take out some of those imperfections. As you get closer to a finished product, working down into a darker heat can be an excellent idea when you're not trying to move the steel so much. Just shift the surface around a little bit. Now what can be a real trick here is I want this point centered. If I put my bar even on the anvil and hammer down, it's going to knock it too far. So you kind of have to look at it, give it some light blows to adjust it. You might try looking down the end. I'm a little bit off here, so we'll give it a blow or two. It's starting to look pretty good here. We can see our punch mark right there. I could take this back just a smidge more potentially, but I think I'm going to be okay with it. And I want to see that as I hold it up against the straight edge, you'll notice that the entire length of the taper is sitting flat against my straight edge here without big curves in or out. If I had a square, I could check to make sure that that is perfectly even, but that looks pretty good. So that's a square taper. The next taper that we're talking about is the octagon taper, and that is an evolution of the square, right? If you're making an octagon taper, if you're making a round taper, you're always going to be starting with the square taper. So let's take this square that we've already made and progress it into the next taper, which is the octagon. In order to do the octagon taper, we're going to be coming in, putting the steel up on the diamond so it's on a corner, and then hammering along the length of that. In order to have our octagon taper truly be an octagon the entire way through, from our center mark or our punch mark down to the end, we actually need to break the corners a little bit back behind our punch mark, right? So we want our octagon to start at that center punch mark, but that means that for this to be an octagon, we've got to be in a semi-octagonal state behind that punch mark. So we're going to get this hot. We're going to start at the back on this one, take this a little bit further back to that semi-octagonal, and then work our way forward. And the goal is where that center punch is, from there forward, nice even sides all the way around. Up on the diamond, start a little ways behind it. Work our way forward with lighter blows. Switch over to the next corner. Same thing, working our way down. One of the things that I can find challenging making octagons is really seeing those lines, especially when the steel is hot. It can be tough to tell exactly where your lines are. So if you are having trouble seeing whether or not you're at an octagon, just letting it cool down a little bit, you should start being able to see those lines more clearly. I'm a little fat on that one, little thin on this one here. Just taking a look at it and seeing where I've got some work to do. Still a little fat there, so I think I want to come in with another heat and clean that side up a little bit, but we're getting close. I think that's looking pretty good there. I did clean it up. My lines were not quite as nice as I would have liked. So I'm coming in and just cleaning stuff up a little bit. Getting rid of a few hammer marks here. Final heat, cleaned it up, and then saw where I had some stuff that was a little off that I didn't like. Went in and cleaned those up at a pretty low heat. You can see what we're looking for here is some nice, as even as you can get them, facets on each side. It does go back a little bit behind our center punch mark there, so that this is actually a true octagon or close to it. And that is your octagonal taper. You make a lot of these primarily for the next taper that we're going to do, which is the round taper. And we're just going to keep evolving this same piece, taking it to kind of the final state. Being good at making the octagons is important to be good at making round tapers. The more even you can get everything when you're going from square to octagon, the more even your round taper is going to be. So spend a little bit of time making sure that looks nice, especially if you're going to the round taper. But let's get this hot and then we'll take it to the round taper. At this point, the way I think of it anyway is I'm just trying to push all those corners in. So I just made a lot of corners by taking it to an octagon. I want to just keep pushing in anything I see that's standing up, right? Only difference between a circle and a square is the circle doesn't have any corners. You hammer them in, you get your circle. So we're going to come in, you can start on the back or the front. Just roll it gently here. Working in all those corners. Heavier hammer blows in the back. Lightening up as we go forward. Can actually be useful to start in the back. Let the anvil suck a little bit of the heat out of the tip before you hammer on that, especially if you have a habit of hammering too hard and smushing things. That's our center punch mark there. I want to make sure I am going fully around all the way to the back of that center punch. Or back to that center punch. And that does mean that I've got to go a little more than round past the center punch. And I maybe have gone a little bit further than I needed to there. But starting from that center punch mark, going forward, we've got a pretty nice round taper at that point. And again, this is going to go, unless you've got some special tooling or something where you can really isolate it, it's going to need to go back behind your center punch mark a little ways in order to have the right transition. We took this, from the end of the bar back to a mark that we put on the bar. That was 1.5 inches back. We're clearly substantially more than 1.5 inches on this now. Obviously, when you put the square taper in, it's pretty clear that things are extending. But that's true also when you take it to an octagon and when you take it to round. Each of these steps where you're pushing material in is also going to be elongating your taper. So if you're trying to draw out to a specific distance, you're either going to have to do the math or you're gonna have to make a couple test pieces to see how much length you're gonna get for the particular taper that you're looking at when it's in its finished form. But that walks us through the first 3 tapers. Let's take a look now at the diamond taper and the chisel taper. Find our center punch mark, so we know how far back we're gonna go. Come to the edge of the anvil, up on the edge of the diamond. Another corner. Really focusing here on the tip. Trying to make sure that is nice and square on the diamond. And I think we're looking pretty good for a first heat there. So we can see there's the flat. We are sitting right there on that diamond. Next thing we're going to do is heat this up. Be very careful that we're coming back here onto the right edge and take those back all the way to our taper. All right, that is back to our center punch mark. Even all this up. It's nice and straight here. It's looking pretty good. This is another one where when it's real hot, it can be hard to see. Or if you don't have nice flat surfaces, if you've got some extra hammer blows and stuff in there, it can definitely make it a challenge to see that taper. You start getting a lot of different lines going on. Square that up a little bit. But hopefully you can see that is what we're looking for, right? So there's our center punch mark. Might have been a little aggressive with those final hammer blows there. But this is one of the flats. When we come up, we've got now each of these lines, or the face, transitioning into these lines on our diamond. Maybe a little uneven on a couple of these sides. I think it looks pretty good overall. So, there is another one of the basic tapers that we can do. One that I don't actually do very often, as you can probably tell. A little bit hesitant here making this one, but it can be a really nice decorative look. There are places where you're going to want to use this, and it is a good demonstration of your blacksmithing skill. I'm going to cut this off, and we're going to make the final taper, which is the chisel taper. A little bit of thinking that we have to do as we go into that one. We're ready to make the final chisel of this section of the ABANA National Curriculum. The chisel tip is really just kind of like a flathead screwdriver, right? We're going to be bringing this down and flattening it out primarily on two sides. There's a little bit of a trick to it though, right? If we come in and we smush this down on two sides, it's going to flatten it this way, but it is going to elongate it this way. And that's going to cause us some problems because we want our chisel tip to be the same dimensions as the parent bar here, right? We're not trying to make it wider on the end. We could let it go wide and then try and upset it. If we do that though, we're really going to be struggling with it wanting to bend a lot on us. Anytime you heat up more than 1.5 times the length that you're trying to upset, you tend to get a lot more bending than you do upsetting. The way we're going to handle that is we're going to come in and we're going to decrease the dimension here. So we're actually going to give it some hammer blows, narrow this some, so that then when we come in and flatten it, and as it spreads back out, it'll spread back out to our original dimension. So let's get that hot. I've got my center mark, or my punch mark here. So my first blows are going to be here, coming in and narrowing this by maybe 1/3 or somewhere around there. And then we're going to come over, flip it to our final side here, and then go for the flatten. We've got our center punch mark face up. So we're going to come to the side and knock that in a little bit here. So we've taken it in actually more than 1/3, quite a ways. Come to the edge of the anvil. And we can see it swelling back out. Keep that nice and dressed. It's looking pretty good so far. Let's heat that up and we'll finish that up. Over to the far side of the anvil when I'm hammering on the tip there, so my hammer doesn't run into the anvil. Keep things nice and square. A little bit of a swelling on this side. Come in and take that out. There you go. That is looking pretty reasonable. So what I'm looking for here is trying to make sure it's nice and centered. Depending on the application, may be important or not. Again, I want to look and make sure that this is nice and straight the whole way, right? I've got a little bit of a swell there that could come out. That's looking nice. Around all my corners, or all my edges here. The chisel taper, that takes us through the 5 kind of basic blacksmithing tapers that you're going to be using a lot. Each one of these I think does come up in some of the later projects in the national curriculum. If you're working towards your national curriculum and you haven't made a lot of these tapers, my recommendation is learn consistency on them, right? Take the square taper, mark off the same amount, and then make that taper 5 times. What you want to see is that you can't tell one taper from the next, that each one of them looks identical. Do the same thing for each of these tapers until you can get to the point where you are consistently making the tapers the same every time, that'll go a long way towards making sure that your blacksmithing projects come out the way you want them to. That consistency, that repetition on these simple projects can be a huge help when you start making more complicated things. Hopefully this was helpful. The next project I think we're working on is a staple, which is definitely part of the gate latch project that we're working up towards as the end of the ABANA level 1 curriculum. So I'll see you guys next week as we work on that staple. Thanks. It's at home. I don't have my hat.